Hey everybody, Scott here. Today we are going to be talking about Nikon picture controls or film recipes, and specifically the first three that I've made and published for Nikon Z shooters. As a general reminder, this video is brought to you completely ad-free by you, our sponsor. Check the pinned comment for ways that you can help support the channel. So in 2025, I did a 365 project, and one of my major constraints is I wanted a lot of those photos to be straight out of the camera JPEGs. I didn't want to be spending a bunch of time editing RAW files in Lightroom. As a natural consequence, I started to dig into Nikon's own tools for JPEG editing. They have a program called NX Studio, which is very similar to Lightroom or Capture One. You have a bevy of options here on the side panel like exposure, contrast, tone curve, sharpness, noise, grain, noise reduction. All of these things that you're accustomed to in Lightroom can be adjusted in NX Studio, and you can save those adjustments and put those on your Nikon Z camera as a custom picture control. That way, if you want consistent edits, but you don't want to do it at your computer every time, you can just shoot JPEGs. Now, this does come with a number of constraints and things you have to think about in the field that you would never give a second thought to when shooting RAW. So we're going to go through those. I created three of these recipes. Ilford 400, a monochromatic look that comes in three variants with sort of a low, medium, and high contrast. We have Gold 200, which is a great early morning and late day preset when the sun is low. It gives golden tones to everything around you and has a very nostalgic feel. And I have Vintage Film, which pushes really hard into nostalgia, and it's actually what I'm shooting this video on right now. We've got heavy teals and greens and browns, and the whole thing is just muted and beautiful. And I like it a lot for a very different look than something I would normally get out of a RAW file. To get these recipes onto your camera is very straightforward. Just go download the files off of my website. They're hosted on Dropbox. And then put your memory card into your computer. You're going to copy the file that you downloaded from my site onto the root folder of your memory card, as shown here. Once it's on your memory card, you'll put your memory card back in your camera, and you'll navigate to the topmost camera icon in your menu. Once there, scroll down to Manage Picture Control, hit Load/Save, and any picture controls that are in that root folder of your memory card will show up here. Pick the one that you want to install onto your camera, hit OK, and then simply pick an empty slot in which to install it. You can install up to 9 custom recipes on your camera at once, not including any that you might happen to download from Nikon's imaging cloud. Let's start with Ilford 400, which you're seeing now. This was not meant to look like any particular Ilford film stock, but rather to give you a range of options to emulate the sort of vibes that you can get from multiple Ilford films, like the faded scans of HP5, or that really crunchy darkness and high contrast of Delta on medium format. So we've got the base Ilford 400, which you're seeing now. This is the highest contrast version. I also have provided a low and mid contrast version if you want to take some of that edge off or change the look up a little bit. I found that these three looks give you extreme flexibility for basically anything that you want to shoot. Still life, people, a sunny day, a cloudy day, indoor, outdoor, it doesn't matter. You've got the flexibility of these three options. And I'm going to give you some cheat sheets on how you can tweak each of the three to maximize output. For the base Ilford 400 recipe, I will set active D-lighting to normal, but I will crank this up to high if it's a very high contrast scene and I'm trying to preserve highlights. Film grain will be turned on and set to medium 2, and exposure compensation will range generally between 0 to plus 2/3 of a stop, and that's just to offset a loss of contrast that happens when I'm cranking active D-lighting up. There is a push-pull with active D-lighting and exposure compensation. Active D-lighting will raise the overall brightness a little bit. Your exposure compensation will raise the overall brightness. Active D-lighting will kill contrast. Raising your exposure can sometimes add a little bit of contrast back in. So it helps to play with these settings in the field while you're looking through the viewfinder and actively composing your photo, keeping an eye on the histogram as well. For the low version, I've baked in a custom tone curve. So to that end, I will generally keep active D-lighting turned off unless it's a very high contrast scene. I will leave exposure compensation set to 0. And film grain I will still set to medium 2. For the mid version, which is what I typically use, active D-lighting is set between low and normal. Film grain still on medium 2, and exposure compensation set to plus 1/3 of a stop. And if I can remember, I'll set white balance to Kelvin and 10,000. I prefer the way whites look at 10,000, and I like the consistency, even as the light is changing, to have a hard set white balance. Now let's flip between some low, mid, and standard contrast images, these 3 different looks. You can see how the low gives you a very low contrast, flat, faded image. Mid has more balance to it. And then high has that high contrast, crunchy look that I love so much. Now on to Gold 200, which you're seeing right now. This was one of my favorite recipes that I made for the Fujifilm cameras, and I found that you can't port a Fujifilm recipe with any reliability over to Nikon. The best you can do is get as close as you possibly can, and so this is that attempt. I like shooting it in the mornings and the evenings. It really amplifies the golden glow of the sun being low in the sky. And then in midday, it gives a soft, semi-vintage look. You've got some yellows in the highlights. It is a middle contrast type of look, and I just really like how pleasing the images come out. I've got some tips for this recipe, just like Ilford. We're gonna go through those now. Active D-lighting generally will be set to low or normal, depending on how much light is on the scene. As usual, film grain is on, set to medium 2. Exposure compensation, I have found that this profile actually likes negative exposure compensation. So I'll either stay at 0 or I will go negative 1/3 of a stop. And then white balance, I have edited natural light auto and I've tweaked it to A5G0. And that is what I would call the true look of the recipe as designed. But you can also shoot it on Auto 2 Keep Warm Colors. That's what I'm doing right here. And it just takes a little bit of that hard yellow cast out of the image and gives you something a little more neutral if you feel like that's what you're after. One of my favorite things about shooting gold on film are the blues of the sky. So I tried really hard to replicate that slatish blue in this recipe, as well as a little bit of the flatter, lower contrast look that you tend to get on the film stock. You'll see that here as well. And we are back to vintage film. This is not a look I use every day. I've pushed the blues towards teal. The browns are just this beautiful warm tone that come through and leak into the highlights and a little bit into the shadows. There's a faded aesthetic going on. I really like using this when I shoot street or when I shoot an abandoned building. It just adds a little feeling of age into that photo that you wouldn't otherwise get. I think it works really well with the Nikon Zf film grain feature. So here's a couple of tips for vintage film. Active D-lighting will be set to normal but move to high if I get a high contrast scene. Film grain's on, medium 2 as usual. Exposure compensation, plus 1/3 to plus 2/3 to offset active D-lighting contrast loss. Now here's the secret sauce of vintage film, and it's the white balance. If you want that full look, you want more brown look over everything, a little bit of yellow cast, you're gonna wanna use shade. You can dial that back and use cloudy. That takes a little bit of the color cast back out of the look. You could also set the white balance to 6700 manually if you wanted to do that. But I would say at like sunrise and sunset, when you want to get the most color out of the sky and out of dimly lit things, throw that thing on shady and you're going to get just amazing colors. There's also a variant called Vintage Film High. I use that in very flat light. Because of the custom tone curve of this recipe, your highlights will tend to trend towards grayish brown. And if you're in very flat light, that really mutes the photo. That may be something that you want, but if you don't want that, you can switch to vintage film high, and that boosts the highlight intensity back up to overcome some of that flat light. So what have I learned over the last couple of months digging in all this? Well, white balance is king. That's the #1 takeaway. It affects so much of how color works on Nikon. If a creator has a recipe and they specify a white balance, you should pay attention to that. That's how you get the look that they're trying to provide. The one area Nikon is falling really short right now is you cannot set white balance by recipe. I want to set all of my Ilfords to 10,000 so that when I go into the menu and I pick Ilford, it's already set my white balance to 10,000. Then when I flip over to vintage, it's already set my white balance to shade. That would be so nice and would take so much thinking out of all of this. Then you're just down to exposure and exposure compensation to get the actual look that you want. Because so much of shooting JPEG is getting the light and the color right from the get-go. You don't have as much latitude to edit these files at the end of the day. One other thing that I found is a lot of people are sleeping on NX Studio. It's a very powerful program. And one really cool thing is you can take all of these recipes that we've talked about today and import them into your NX Studio and apply these looks to any Nikon file that you've ever shot. I think that is awesome and game-changing. The last thing I will say is, despite all of this starting as wanting to just shoot JPEG, there is a bonus to shooting RAW plus JPEG. Let's say I'm shooting Gold 200 and I really like the image, but I wonder what that would have looked like had I used vintage. Well, I can go into playback on that photo, hit the I button and hit retouch. And then I can create a new version of that file that's using the vintage film preset instead. And then when I hit execute, I get an extra JPEG on my SD card that's as if I took that photo in the field using a different recipe. I think that is awesome, and I use that all the time now. I think that's the best tip that I can give you for this whole JPEG business is you should still be shooting RAW plus JPEG, because not only can you edit the RAWs like that later in NX Studio and apply different looks, you can do it straight from your camera. I wanted to share these looks. I wanted to get your opinions on them. As always, everything is free. The links are all down in the description to each recipe. If you guys use these, I would love to hear what you think. Just drop me a line down in the comments. Tell me which one's your favorite. We will talk very soon. And as always, thank you guys for your continued support of the channel. You guys leaving super thanks, using my Ko-fi link for donations, and using my links for gear support this channel in a way that Google Ads never could. And I'm so happy to be bringing you all of this ad-free. We will talk very soon. Thank you guys for watching.